Hello, welcome to another Whisky Me live tasting. As usual, you're lumped with me, Tristan, your host for the evening, as we explore this month's dram, which of course is Tullibardine 15. Super excited to taste this one and super excited to hear your feedback on it. Very shortly, once the numbers have popped up a little bit more, we're going to be joined by Mike Elliot from Tullibardine Distillery. Not actually in Tullibardine Distillery right now, I don't think. Anyway, he didn't look like he was when I spoke to him a minute ago. Who's going to do the usual and talk us through a little bit of the background about the distillery, take us through the tasting, talk a little bit more about Tullibardine 15, and then answer any questions that you might have, or indeed respond to any comments that you might have about the dram. So without further ado, I give you Mike Elliot. Hey, Mike.
Hi, Tristan. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out to spend half an hour with us talking through this dram and discussing it with me. I really appreciate your time.
No, look, absolutely delighted to be here. What I will do is I'll do a wee apology. I'm not at the distillery. I am at home.
No worries.
I would have liked to be at the distillery, but having done a couple of live tastings before, when the Wi-Fi didn't behave itself, decided not to. And also, if there's any sounds of wild rhinoceros up the stairs, that is a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. So hopefully they behave themselves for the next half an hour as well, Tristan.
Even noisier than the average distillery background noise, right?
Exactly.
A 4-year-old. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, look, super. I'm really want to get tasting this dram, but I think it's probably a good idea to ask you a little bit of background information around the distillery for the audience, just to sort of give us some context about where Tullibardine sits in its history, because it's a relatively new distillery, right? But it's also got some very old history. So it'd be wonderful if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good summary. So first of all, hi to everybody that's tuned in tonight. So yeah, I'm Mike Elliot, General Manager at Tullibardine Distillery. So the distillery itself has a history right back to 1488. That was actually, previously the site was then actually a brewery. And the first recorded transaction of beer being bought in Scotland took place in 1488 when King James IV, on his return from his recent coronation at Scone Palace, actually made a purchase at the distillery. So we can date, if you like, brewing at that stage right back to the current location in 1488. But it wasn't actually until 1947 that a gentleman, William Delme Evans, was exploring a different location for a distillery, and he came across the exact site, which is Tullibardine Distillery today. And after a couple of years of experimentation, it was 1949 that the distillery actually opened. And one of the reasons why the location was chosen, we're very, very lucky to have a mineral-rich source of water at the distillery, the local Danny Burn. And that was a particular reason why the location was chosen there. And then taking the history on from there, a number of different ownerships of the distillery up until about 1993. So at that stage, Tullibardine itself wasn't really a single malt. It was typically a blended malt that was used. Laterally at that time, owned by White and Mackay, it was a blending malt. And actually back in 1993, volumes were at a stage in the industry, the decision was actually taken to close the distillery. And I guess when I say close the distillery, it sat mothballed for 10 years. So the image, if anybody has seen the distillery at all now, the image then was the grass grew, buildings started to fall down. And for 10 years, the site did nothing before it was reinvented by a group of local businessmen back in 2003. And I guess it's the first point I would make here is we even recognise today that, we stand on the shoulder of these people that decided to bring the distillery back to life. Did a very, very successful job in that, which then took us to 2011, where the current owners, the Picard family in France, actually bought the distillery. So it'll be 10 years later this year that it's been family-owned, independent, and the distilleries went from strength to strength. We're now producing 3 million litres of alcohol a year against a capacity of 3 million litres of alcohol per year. So, the distillery runs 24/7, and on site, we have not just the distillery, we have warehousing, we have a cooperage. We're actually one of only 6 distilleries in Scotland which actually bottles on site as well.
Yeah.
So we've got a bottling line and we have the visitor centre. So sadly closed at the moment. But what we really appreciate on the site is not only do we have the full production, but we get that lucky ability to to meet consumers on a day-to-day basis as well, which is absolutely fantastic. And in total on the site, the workforce is about 35, including the visitor centre for all operations. So, a relatively small distillery, in comparison to some, but a really lovely history. And we think particularly a nice single malt that we produce on site as well, Tristan.
Yeah, just going right back to the ancient history, that King James, who purchased beer from the Blackford Brewery, was the same King James that ordered the first ever sort of cachet of single malt, right?
Correct.
Friar John Core, yeah. So this he's obviously liked to drink, right? Literally everywhere he went, he's just ordering up beer and whiskey. So like the first written reference we have to whiskey being purchased in Scotland, which I think was 1494, was from this same King James. It was an order for the royal household.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So very well established, at that stage, and particularly in that area, absolutely. And even right now, I guess we're quite handy for those that do want to drop in and buy a whiskey. We're just at the gateway to the Highlands on the A9. We're about an hour north of Edinburgh, an hour north of Glasgow as well. So potentially King James at the time recognised we were quite a good central location. I don't know.
Yeah,
but, we're certainly well placed at the moment.
Yeah, it's a good point actually. You are pretty accessible compared to a lot of distilleries in Scotland. You're not that difficult to get to, which is why it's a crying shame that I've not visited personally, because I did spend quite a lot of time in Scotland. Well, not this last year, visiting distilleries, and never visited. But I will pay you a visit next time I'm up. And it's worth noting, like, because only an hour from Glasgow, hour from Edinburgh, you're close to Perth and Stirling, right? It is super accessible.
Yeah, we're very much the gateway to the Highlands. So we are a Highland region distillery, but as I say, very much at the southern, if you like, the southern point of the Highlands there. So, and if anybody's interested, as another point of reference, because we're in the small town of Blackford, Gleneagles Hotel is just only a couple of miles up the road as well. So. Like I say, there's some quite nice accommodation nearby as well.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit what's happened in the last 10 years since the new ownership, because my understanding is there's been quite a lot of work done in the distillery, especially in the warehousing with the oak policy. And then now obviously we have a 15-year-old, a distillery release, and quite an old one at that, right? I mean, it's not, you're not going in at 10 or 12. It's because there isn't anything younger, I believe, right? This is the starting point.
Yeah, well, what I'll do is let me give you I'll give you a quick walkthrough in terms, as you say, some of the recent 10-year events, and then a very quick summary of the portfolio. But I think when the distillery was reborn, and again, this is credit to the group that brought the distillery back to life. Up to that point, because the distillery had very much been about blending whiskey, in its own right, single malt wasn't the reason of the production. So very much today, building on what happened since 2003, everything that we distill on site is filled into first fill bourbon barrels. So, without exception. So the base of any Tullibardine single malt is first fill, good quality American bourbon barrels. And then what we do from there is we effectively have, if I was to call it our core range, we have the Sovereign, which would be, again, if you'd want to call it our standard single malt, where you very much get the signature of Tullibardine single malt, which is the floral, the vanilla, almost malted biscuits. That would very much be that kind of light Highland signature that we are looking for. And then what we do is, particularly with our Sovereign itself is non-aged, but we have our non-aged finishes where we have a Burgundy finish, which is Pinot Noir casks that come from the company's own vineyard in France. We have Sauterne wine finish, and we also have sherry finish. So it's at this point we start to build in the layers of profile and complexity. The 15-year-old, which if you want to almost call that the next step, which is our first aged in the range right now in terms of chronologically, that has been 15 years all in first fill bourbon barrels. So again, what you really then see in the 15-year-old, which we're particularly happy with, is it's the building blocks of the vanilla, the toffee, the floral that you would get with Tullibardine. But that 15 years in the bourbon really brings to life, the complexity which we'll try. We also bring out a range of limited editions, typically one a year, which we call the Murray range. That would be another, albeit non-age, that's in that 11, 12, maybe even approaching 15 years. But we also do 20-year-old, which is currently being phased out. We've got a 25-year-old. And for anybody, again, familiar with the brand, we have the Custodian range also, where we have bottled a 1962, 1964, and also a 1970 expression. So we do have a wealth of inventory, but there is that 10-year inventory gap, Tristan, that we talked about between 93 and 2003. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there was still stock sitting around maturing, but nothing being produced and being put into cask at that time.
Absolutely correct. So if I was to take an example of our 25-year-old right now, our 25-year-old is all, liquid from pre-1993.
So that's why the 20 is being discontinued, because you just don't have anything. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. A few people were disappointed at that, but we did have to say there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing we can do about it. So what's really nice about the 15-year-old is that although the distillery was reborn in 2003, effectively the first distilling coming off was 2004. So when we launched the 15-year-old last year, the reality is that this is the first distillation which was being produced at that time that we are now delighted to be bottling as a 15-year-old. And there's a couple of nice stories as well on site where our current distillery manager, David Miles, he's been here for that whole time as well. So he's actually went from filling those casks to now actually bottling them as well. So there's quite a nice few parallels with a 15-year-old for the site and some of the people there also. Yeah,
that's cool. Oh, well, I suppose there's a chance that a 20 will come back again in a few years then, right? Because you'll have been distilling 20 years in what, 2024, right?
Potentially, exactly. Yeah, we're also looking to bring out a couple of other age statements in the next 2 years as well.
Cool. All right, good stuff. Well, look, let's taste it because I'm ready. I've got my pouch. And I expect you've got a whole bottle, haven't you? Which is one of the perks of being...
Actually, I opened a fresh bottle as well this evening, which it was nice to have an excuse to do so.
Yeah, why not? I'm going to drink all of my pouch. I don't expect you to drink the whole of the bottle. But if you do, that's cool as well.
Exactly.
So do you want to talk us through aroma and taste and that kind of thing? And if anyone has any comments, then please do share them in the comments.
The first point I will make here right now is I recognise this is quite subjective. Particularly for anybody that comes in the distillery on a tour, we don't try and make whiskey complicated. We do try and make it feel accessible, which I think, Tristan, very similar to yourselves at Whisky Me. People will like it. Some people, we hope nobody doesn't like it, but everybody will get something different here. But typically with the 15-year-old, what we found and what we're particularly pleased with when we're pulling this together is you very much are getting what we would say is the classic Tullibardine, so the floral, the hay, the malted biscuits. But particularly on the nose, we've had comments about jellied fruits.
Yeah.
Parma violet sweets tends to be something that people resonates when people actually, nose the liquid, they then say that's what that is. So Parma violets is often something that gets mentioned, but you really are getting the vanilla, the cream, which has all come from that bourbon over the last 15 years.
It's funny you say about how it's subjective, and of course it is, but it's even to the point where at different times of the day, I find that I smell and taste different things. I think probably some of it's based on what I might have eaten beforehand or drank beforehand, and possibly even the weather, or the mood you're in. It can be any or all of those things tend to impact slightly what you detect. And, I'm smelling different things to when I last nosed it, a few weeks ago. So it is quite fascinating. And certainly today, right now, it is smelling really floral to me.
Yep. And again, before it even then comes to the tasting side, it's obviously personal preference whether somebody decides to, have it neat, have it with water. Again, each to your own. What we have found with the 15-year-old particularly, the addition of even just a small amount of water, does bring out additional flavours and profile in the nose as well. So even if just a couple of drops is something I would recommend people try and get that difference. But as I see one of the comments come through in the Parma Violets, and that was certainly, it's not until it's mentioned, you then start to trigger something in your head. So it's nice to see a couple of comments come through.
Well, that's the other thing as well about tasting and nosing, isn't it? The power of suggestion, and how you're like, oh, I can smell something, and then suddenly it gets amplified when someone says a particular, description or
Baked apples is another common descriptor that obviously we use with the product, and others it tends to resonate as well.
Yeah, cool. Right, shall we have a taste?
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's at the moment, I'm really getting a lot of those kind of candy shop jelly sweets. And of course, some of those sweets are flavored with these sort of quite potent estery floral kind of or fruity compounds. And so it's really all of that sort of sweet shop confected deliciousness that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, again, typical. Certainly, what I find with this as well, that kind of sweet barley sweets, barley sugar, almost getting a wee bit sherbety.
We can go around the whole sweet shop, can't we? Just like a pick and mix. Bit of sherbet, some barley sugar, bonbons. I'm going to try a little bit of water in there as well.
I mean, the 15-year-old, since we launched it, we've had some really nice feedback, which is great. Of course, it is. But we do think particularly, our spirit ages well. Because I think we're getting all the goodness out of the wood. We're getting a lot of complex of that maturation there, but it's in no way we find overpowered. Although you get clearly the wood, that oaky note in the background. Certainly, we don't find that that's in any way overpowering. So to the point that we still have that core floral, malted biscuits and the fruits that we get on the core range, we think we're getting a really nice balance here on the 15-year-old.
I agree. I mean, for me, a sort of mature whiskey is not one that tastes of wood, and it's not one that doesn't taste of the distillery character either. It's when those two come together and you find something sort of new that isn't present in the wood or the distillery character, and it creates, in this case, a lot of floral, sort of sweeter smelling aromas. And that's sort of where in the magic of whiskey, really, isn't it? You're like, well, this is just made from malted barley and wood, and yet it smells and tastes like all these wonderful things.
Absolutely. And certainly even kind of right now, what people will typically pick up is that kind of warming spice on your tongue as well, that just basically stays with you a good time after you've had that drink, but just that nice spice that just has that heat at the back of your at the back of your throat as well.
Yeah, really good stuff. We are getting a lot of tasting notes coming through this week. People are definitely loving this. Well, can't wait to try the 20-year-old. We better get it while you can, right?
Absolutely.
It's running out.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Vanilla, sugar, sweeties. I thought James Angus, I thought you said put sweeties. Come on, for a second. Let's come in. I was like, come on. It's so tasty. Really good, not harsh. I mean, this is true. It's got a softness about it, hasn't it? I'd say it's very accessible malt, actually. If we were going to scale malts on an accessibility level, then it would definitely be high up there. There's really nothing to be offended by in it. It's not too powerful. There's obviously not too much or any smoke in there. Also, like you say, because it's all first fill bourbon, there's not any of that potential danger of like too much sherry cask or wine cask coming in that might potentially put some people off. I think it's really good.
Yeah. No, I said it's something we've been particularly delighted about when the 15-year-old launched, and the feedback has been really really, really appreciated on it from everybody.
Yeah. Good stuff. Cool. So how much does this cost for a bottle?
Well, certainly retail, although there'll be a slight variance in terms of retail, it should be between about £50 and £55 that people should be finding the 15-year-old. So again, that's something we believe from a price point, we think we're actually well priced as well versus some of the competition in the market also.
At 15-year-old, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Although we've also got the presentation pack as well, so it's actually not only a product from a drinking perspective. Oh, I'll get my camera the right way.
Yeah.
It's actually really quite a nice presentation in terms of a gifting item as well. Is feedback that we're getting. People are particularly happy with the packaging option, which is there as well. So that would be the typical retail that you'd expect to find the 15-year-old.
Nice. Remember, you can buy that on the website, whiskyme.com, if you want to pick up a bottle, folks. So we've got the 25-year-old as well, the 15, and then there's a few other expressions. So there are some wine cask finishes in there.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, so in terms of our core range, I mean, our core range is non-aged. In terms of our core range between the Sauvignon, the Burgundy, Sauternes, and the Sherry, we're typically in that 6 to 8 year territory, to be honest. But yeah, probably the most interesting one would probably be the Burgundy in our core range, where, as I said before, these are Pinot Noir casks that have come from the company's own vineyards in France. Predominantly, our business was a wine company, so we're actually due a delivery of our next wine cask in 2 weeks' time. So they come straight from our vineyard, and we fill them at the distillery. So the Burgundy finish it's probably a particular favourite of mine within the core range. But then equally with the Sauternes, that slightly sweeter wine. And then, as you would expect, we do have that sherry finish as well, all from first fill sherry cask. So we have a really nice entry, and then the finishes. And then, as I said before as well, we also have the Murray, which would be our typical annual release. And we do have our latest Murray, which has just come out recently, which is a double wood, which is, again, in sherry there as well. So, slightly less in terms of, it's there or thereabouts age of the 15-year-old, but limited edition in the sense we will bottle that this year and then there will be no more. So,
how much does that one go for?
That's retailing at £60, £59.99 is the recommended retail price on the double wood.
There's definitely an advantage to being owned by a French wine company, right? Just the access to cask is good.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one of them, but probably one of the biggest credits I can pay in terms of that ownership, the family independent piece first and foremost is that there is a real passion for what we do at the distillery. And I guess ultimately a business, a family that's come from wine, it's all about the product. It is all about the artisan nature of what we're doing, and then as you'd expect, in terms of access to casks, but very, 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 very good support from the Picard family in France there. But it is all about the quality, the quality of that spirit and doing things properly.
We have a question. Do you have any PX casks?
We do. So actually, within our sherry finish, in terms of the core range. That will be a mix of PX and Oloroso casks, first fills that we source directly from Spain.
Nice. Yeah, that puts the cats amongst the pigeons. PX, I mean, it can sometimes send a whiskey down a very kind of heavy, deep, sweet route, can't it? But it can also really I've always thought PX casks work really well with peated whiskies. There's something about that sort of sweet raisiny thing that goes well with smoke. But
sorry, Tristan, I would agree. No. What we certainly try and do, we do have a mix of PX and Oloroso where we have our sherry finish, and it's exactly as you say. For us, it's just trying to get that balance of if you were being typically, general about it, you're right, that sweetness of the PX, and we find that sort of richness that comes through in the Oloroso. So we do source both, and we'll use them in our whiskey. Here's
a good question. What do you do with the 15-year-old casks once the whiskey's been disgorged and bottled?
They have been and will continue to be refilled. So they'll be refilled again at the distillery. Certainly there is still life in those casks. We will probably not age them for another 15 years straight away, but yep, they get refilled at the distillery again.
Love an Oloroso version. Well, it sounds like you're not putting anything to Oloroso straight away, but you are finishing an Oloroso, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So that's the best way to taste Tullibardine.
I mean, what I would certainly say right now, particularly with the double wood, where we have done an amalgamation of the first fill bourbon and whiskey that's matured for a long time, and in some cases its whole life in terms of in the sherry. I think if somebody's a particular sherry fan, I would recommend the double wood, but equally the sherry finish in the core range, I think nobody will be disappointed in at all.
Nice. Sounds like there's plenty of different ones to choose from. Cool. Look, I've finished mine, which means our time's probably up because I start getting really boring when there's no whiskey left. You've got plenty left, mind you.
I do, yeah, and it's a Thursday night. It's a Thursday night, so why not?
Thirsty Thursday, right?
Exactly.
That's why we do it on a Thursday. Cool. I think it's great. I love that sort of. I've always been a sucker for these sort of candy shop whiskies because they're just so evocative of like that sort of childish pleasure of stuffing sweets into your mouth, and it feels like an adult version of that with a whiskey. So yeah, really cool. And I think based on the feedback, we're going to need to come and revisit you at some point and feature another whiskey because it seems that there's a bit of appetite for Tullibardine. Maybe we'll do one of the non-age statement wine or sherry cask finishes or something like that next time to sort of mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, look, I'd be delighted to again. Look, it's not lost on me that the opportunity to connect with people like this we don't get very often. So I really appreciate the opportunity. And look, if there was a demand for it, we'd be delighted to come back and talk about anything in the range, or answer any direct questions that have come up tonight, Tristan. That'd be no problem at all.
Here's one more just before you go. 12 months red wine finish. Will you be doing any longer than that?
At the minute, we do have some casks that are sitting in a longer maturation. There was a limited release. We actually did a Chateauneuf de Pape Murray release a few years ago. So although there's not any immediate plans because you did that, I can confirm we have some nice whiskey aging in mature red wine casks.
Oh.
We've got some tawny port, white port, some Madeira casks. So there's a lot of really nice, interesting things happening in the background, and I would certainly expect that. That's where our Murray range comes in. That's where we like to look at some of these experimental finishes for us. We also have last year we introduced a distillery exclusive bottling. We actually didn't have a distillery exclusive until last year. So we did our first limited 300 bottle batch of a Madeira finish cask strength, non-chill filtered. And we've actually just today bottled editions number 2 and editions number 3, which are coming down the track in the distillery soon as well. So
worth a visit then.
Yeah, being a muscatel and another interesting bourbon. So yeah, we're trying to do a few interesting things with the casks that we've got.
Right, when we're allowed, we'll all be heading up to get this distillery exclusive bottlings and to tour your warehouse and sample all these incredible casks.
You're more than welcome. More than welcome.
All right, Mike. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate that. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you for your questions, and do feel free to continue leaving comments because we do look at them and we'll try and respond to them too. Bye bye.
Thanks everybody.